My daughter forged my name and signature to transfer the vineyard into her husband's name, said I was holding on to the past. I let her plan the grand opening. But when guests arrived, they found something that they never expected. I will tell you how it all unfolded. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Jasmine Sawyer. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. My name is Raymond Clark, and for most of my life, I believed the vines would outlast the blood. Clark Estate Vineyard sat on the western slopes of Sonoma County, its rows of Zinfandel and Chardonnay rolling out like green tides under the California sun. My father planted the first vines in 1951 after returning from Korea. My mother kept the books, and together they built something meant to last. When I took over in '92, it wasn't just a business. It was an inheritance of soil, sun, and sacrifice. The kind of legacy you sweat into, not sign away. But what I didn't realize, what I refused to see, was that my daughter, Elise, never saw it that way. Not really. She grew up knowing the weight of tradition, but she never embraced it. While I was pruning vines at dawn, she was buried in glossy magazines with headlines about tech moguls and luxury lifestyles. As a teenager, she'd mock the smell of the wine cellar. Smells like old feet and broken dreams, she once quipped, laughing while I stood there with a barrel thief in hand, stunned into silence. At the time, I wrote it off as immaturity. College would round her out, I thought. Exposure to history, to economics, to literature, that would temper her. But instead, she met Darren. Darren was the type of man who spoke in buzzwords. Scalability, synergy, brand potential. When I shook his hand the first time, I noticed he never made full eye contact. His palm was too smooth, his smile too eager. He didn't respect the vineyard. He saw acreage and cash flow. Elise brought him home for Thanksgiving 3 years ago, and by dessert, he was already pitching how we could optimize the hospitality experience with themed tasting rooms and influencer partnerships. I remember gripping my wine glass until it cracked slightly in my hand. Darren didn't notice. Elise did, and she smirked. It started small, as betrayals often do. They wanted to modernize the logo. I resisted, but eventually agreed to a few subtle changes. Then it was the tasting menu. No more traditional pairings, but experiential flights with imported cheeses and small-batch chocolates. I tolerated it for the sake of keeping her engaged. She was my only child. After her mother died, it was just the two of us. I'd been so afraid of losing her to grief that I never once challenged her ambitions. That was my mistake. I confused tolerance with trust. The distance between us became more visible over time. Elise stopped attending harvest meetings, started coming in late and leaving early. She'd host private tastings for her husband's investor friends and never loop me in. Still, I convinced myself it was transitional, that she'd come around. I even stepped back from operations, hoping space would give her confidence. I told myself I was doing it for her. The truth is, I was just too tired to keep fighting someone I loved so deeply. I didn't know she'd already made her move until it was too late. The county office called one morning about a title discrepancy. I assumed it was a clerical error, maybe a misfiled permit. What I found instead was a transfer deed with my name scrawled in shaky, loop-heavy letters, clearly forged, and my signature placed at the bottom like a final insult. She'd transferred full ownership of Clark Estate Vineyards into Darren's name. Not even a joint ownership. Not a trust. Just gone. Signed over like a used car. I stared at that document for hours, the air sucked from my lungs. I kept thinking it had to be a prank, some test of my resolve. But it was real. Notarized by one of Darren's friends, filed by Elise herself. She hadn't just taken the vineyard, she had erased me from it. That night, I sat alone in the tasting room, lights off, a bottle of the 2007 Reserve uncorked in front of me. I didn't drink it. I just stared at it. That vintage had won us our first gold medal in San Francisco. I remembered how Elise, then 17, had beamed with pride at the award ceremony. Or maybe I just thought she did. Memory plays cruel tricks when you're betrayed. It either romanticizes or demonizes everything. I didn't know which version to trust anymore. I could have gone to the police right then. I could have stormed into her house, demanded an explanation, threatened to expose her. But I didn't. Instead, I said nothing. I let her believe she'd won. When she announced the grand reopening under Darren's new company name, the Terravine Collective, I nodded and offered my congratulations. I smiled through my teeth. Let her plan the whole damn thing. Because that was when I decided. If she was going to bury me, I was going to make sure she heard every nail go into her own coffin. And I wouldn't even raise my voice. The first thing I did was call my lawyer, Victor. He and I went back nearly 30 years. Through zoning disputes, harvest contracts, even my late wife's estate. Victor was a bulldog in a cardigan, all wit and paperwork, with a quiet kind of rage when something unjust crossed his desk. I faxed him the deed with Elise's forged signature. He called back in under 10 minutes. "Ray, this is criminal," he said, his voice low and clipped. "She forged a legal document. It's identity theft, fraud, and grand theft, all wrapped in one slick little bow." I didn't respond right away. I was sitting at my kitchen table, still in the clothes I'd worn yesterday, staring at the empty chair where Elise used to eat breakfast before school. The same chair she'd pulled up to while studying vineyard maps for her agriculture class. Or maybe just doodling. God, had I really been that blind? "She's my daughter," I finally said, my voice hoarse. "What do you do when your own child robs you with a smile?" Victor didn't answer for a while. Then he said, "You decide whether you want justice or peace. But I'll warn you, Ray, sometimes you can't have both." I wasn't ready to act, not yet. The wounds were too fresh, and besides, Elise was still planning the grand reopening of my vineyard under her husband's name. It was rebranded as Terravine, a minimalist monstrosity with a bland Instagram presence and a logo that looked like something a software company would use. The date was set for late April, 6 weeks away. She posted daily on social media. Sneak peeks of the new labels, a photo of her holding a glass of rose with the caption, "Out with the old, in with the bold." I saved every post. Not to hurt her, but to remind myself. She didn't know I had already launched a quiet investigation. Through Victor, I contacted a forensic document examiner to confirm the signature forgery. Then I reached out to a journalist friend who owed me a favor. Not for the current theft, no. Elise's current crime was obvious. But the story I wanted told went deeper. You see, Elise had a history of cutting corners. Back in college, she'd started a student-run delivery service that used undocumented workers under the table. She framed it as a mutual opportunity, cheap labor for her, under-the-radar jobs for them. But one day, 2 of those workers were caught in a sting operation at a gas station, and Elise vanished from the project. Publicly, she said it had been hijacked by unethical partners. Privately, she threatened one of the whistleblowers into silence. I only knew because the boy's sister, one of our vineyard workers, confided in my wife before she passed. I'd kept that secret for years, thinking Elise would change. She didn't. So I pulled every record I could. Tax filings, emails, pay stubs Elise thought she'd erased. I handed them to my journalist friend with a single request. Tell the truth. Don't soften it. I also contacted the local farm workers union. Told them what had happened. Told them what was coming. They remembered Elise. They remembered what she'd done. When I asked if they'd be willing to show up on opening day, their leader just said, "Say the word." I played the long game. I smiled at Elise during our one awkward lunch that month, when she invited me to talk transition. She sat across from me at a trendy cafe in Napa, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. She ordered oysters and didn't touch them. I ordered a black coffee and drank it slowly. "I know this hurts," she said, laying her manicured hand over mine. "But you have to understand, you were holding on to the past. Terravine is about evolution. Growth. We're doing something bold." I pulled my hand away. "You didn't just take the vineyard. You took my name. My identity. Oh, come on, Dad. You weren't even using it. You were retiring, remember? This was always the plan." "No, Elise. You planned this." "I just didn't think my own daughter would steal from me." She rolled her eyes and flagged down the waiter. "God, you're so dramatic." That was the last time we spoke in person. I watched her pay with a card tied to the vineyard account. She had no shame. That's when I stopped feeling guilt. That's when I decided this would end publicly, permanently. The day before the opening, I drove out to the vineyard and parked just beyond the main entrance. The new Terravine banner flapped above the gate like a white flag of surrender. Inside, lights were strung across the trellises, white tents lined the walkways, and a hired string quartet rehearsed softly in the background. It was beautiful, hollow, and stolen, but beautiful. I stayed just long enough to watch Elise give directions to the caterers. She looked radiant. Not the child I raised, but a polished stranger. Then I drove away, leaving behind the last of my sentimentality. I had something better now, leverage. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked the house barefoot, wine glass in hand, my mind racing. My wife's photo sat above the fireplace, her eyes soft, kind, forgiving. I whispered, "I'm sorry." I tried. At 2:14 a.m., my phone buzzed. A blocked number. I answered, breath held. "Mr. Clark." It was the journalist. "The piece goes live at 9 a.m. sharp. County records, witness statements, everything you gave us." I also interviewed one of the workers she exploited. He cried, "Ray," he said, "tell her I remember what she did." I closed my eyes. The vineyard would be filled with guests by noon. Media, investors, old family friends. By then, the article would already be circulating. The protesters would be stationed outside. The gates would be locked. The name Terravine would be buried before it ever sprouted roots. I didn't want revenge. Not really. I wanted her to understand what she destroyed. But if she wouldn't look back, I'd make sure the world looked forward, with disgust. And when the dust settled, I'd make the final move, arrest. The morning of the grand opening arrived with a thick fog blanketing the vineyard. From the main road, the rows of vines looked ghostly, draped in mist like mourners in waiting. I stood across the road on a rise overlooking the estate, hidden behind a stand of eucalyptus. In my coat pocket was a folded copy of the article that had dropped just after sunrise. The headline stretched in bold across the top, "Vineyard Heiress or Villain." Elise Clark's dark past and shady takeover. By 10 a.m., it was already trending in the local news cycle. By 11, the national blogs had picked it up. By noon, all hell had broken loose. Guests began arriving just before midday, black cars, Mercedes sedans, sleek convertibles. Darren stood at the gate in a fitted navy suit, shaking hands like a politician on the campaign trail. Elise wore white, as if she were a bride to the land she stole. I could see her posing for a photographer in front of the new Terravine sign, her hand resting on the gate latch. That gate never opened. Instead, 30 members of the local farm workers union marched down the gravel path leading up from the East Road, holding signs scrawled in both English and Spanish. "Wage theft is not innovation. You can't rebrand exploitation." Elise Clark lied to us all. They planted themselves across the front of the estate in total silence. Their presence was louder than any chant. The guests paused, confused, phone starting to record. A woman in heels stumbled back toward her car. Darren's eyes darted. Elise smiled too long, too tightly, before walking over to speak to the crowd. From my perch on the hill, I couldn't hear her words. But I saw her mouth moving, her hands gesturing, the way her smile flickered like a dying bulb. She was trying to spin it. Always spinning. That's when someone handed her a phone, an iPad maybe, flashing the article. I watched her expression freeze, then crack. She looked up in my direction, though she couldn't see me. Her face went pale, and for the first time in years, I saw the little girl again. The one who used to ask me if monsters were real. Darren pulled her aside, whispering furiously. She shook her head. The crowd began to murmur. A camera crew from Channel 7 News pulled up along the shoulder of the road, dragging cables and tripods. That's when the sheriff's deputy stepped out of his cruiser. Deputy Marquez had known my family for decades. He was the one who'd helped us during the wildfires of 17, the one who'd stopped by after my wife's funeral without saying a word, just sat with me and drank coffee. I'd called him 2 days earlier, gave him the paperwork Victor helped prepare. Fraud, identity theft, falsifying legal documents. All of it airtight. We agreed. He wouldn't make the arrest until the event was public, documented, impossible to deny. He approached the couple calmly, flanked by another deputy. "Elise Clark," he asked loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Darren Maddox? I have a warrant for your arrest." The sound that followed was a mix of gasps, phone snapping photos, and someone's glass of sparkling rose shattering on the gravel. Elise began to cry, not loudly, but in a kind of stunned, choked disbelief. Darren demanded a lawyer. "This is a goddamn setup," he shouted. "This is defamation. I'll sue every one of you." Marquez didn't flinch. "Sir, you're welcome to do that." From jail. The crowd split like water. People were backing away, whispering, texting, recording. Elise turned to Darren, her voice barely audible from where I stood, but I recognized the frantic, fractured way she moved her hands. She was blaming him, saying she didn't know, that she had trusted him. It was pathetic. The same girl who once told me to trust her with the Vineyard, now throwing her husband under the bus just to stay afloat. As they were led to the cruiser, handcuffed, I stepped out of the trees. I wanted her to see me. She did. Our eyes locked for 3 seconds, just 3. But it was enough. I didn't smile. I didn't smirk. I simply nodded once, slow and deliberate. Her face twisted into something between rage and heartbreak. "Dad," she shouted, stumbling forward. "Please, please, I didn't mean for this," he told me. "He said it was legal." I said nothing, just turned my back and walked away. By the time I reached my truck, my phone was buzzing with calls. My brother, 2 cousins. Even the mayor's office left a message asking if I'd comment. I didn't answer any of them. I drove into town, pulled into the parking lot of a diner I hadn't visited in years, and ordered the meatloaf special. The waitress brought it with a side of coleslaw and a confused glance. "You celebrating something, Mr. Clark?" I looked down at my plate. You could say that. An hour later, my phone buzzed again, this time, a voicemail. Elise. Her voice was raw, cracked wide open. "Dad, I'm sorry. I don't even know what to say. Darren's already trying to cut a deal. They said if I cooperate, I might get house arrest. I didn't mean to hurt you. I wanted to prove I could do something big. I wanted people to take me seriously. Please don't hate me. Please call me back." I played it twice. Then I deleted it. Because I did hate her. Not in the way you hate a stranger. No, this hate was intimate. The kind only possible when love has rotted into something cold and sharp. She didn't just take my land. She took me. My name, my signature, my bloodline, and handed it over to a man who saw my life's work as a marketing asset. She begged for forgiveness through a cell phone, but she never once walked the vines with me when I asked. Never once looked at the soil under her nails and thought, "This is mine to protect." So no, I didn't call her back. I didn't visit her in jail. I didn't comfort her with promises of future reconciliation. That chapter was already closed. And the ink on her name was drying in police records. The first few nights after the arrest were eerily quiet. The Vineyard, even under my partial control through legal injunction, felt like a mausoleum, a rows of silent vines, their summer buds oblivious to the chaos that had unfurled just days earlier. Every footstep I took echoed. The tasting room still bore traces of Elise's redesign, slick black menus with the Terravine logo, a branded backdrop for influencer photos. I didn't touch any of it. I let it all rot in place. It was proof of her arrogance, a gallery of ego. By the third day, the media storm had begun to settle, but not without damage. The article had gone viral. Old college classmates came forward with stories. Former employees posted anonymously about being threatened or underpaid. One even claimed Darren had made off-color comments about replacing the locals with automation. I didn't have to say a word. Elise and Darren had built their empire on a foundation of lies, and now the entire thing was collapsing under its own weight. That's when she called. It was late, nearly midnight. My phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize, though the area code told me it was local. I let it ring twice before answering. I knew who it was. Dad? Her voice was fragile, stripped of the venom and sarcasm that had once dripped from it. There was no performance, no pretense. Just Elise, raw and small. I'm in the county holding facility, she said, her voice shaking. They processed us together, but Darren made bail already. His father wired the money. I didn't say anything. She sniffled. I know you're angry. I know I crossed the line. But I need you to understand why I did it. No apology yet. Just the same justifications. I let her speak. I felt like you never believed in me. You always acted like I didn't belong here, like I was just some spoiled little girl playing dress-up. Darren said we could take it to the next level, that the Vineyard could be something global, not just local tradition. I thought I was saving it. I closed my eyes. The memory of her as a child flashed in my mind. her running between the barrels, laughing, her hair tangled with wildflowers. She had once loved this place, or at least pretended to. Forging my name, I said flatly. That's how you save something? There was silence on the other end. A long one. I panicked, she finally whispered. I didn't think you'd give it up. I thought you'd hold on until it withered. Darren kept saying you were stuck in the past. And I believed him. I stood at the kitchen sink, staring at the moonlit vineyard beyond the window. I didn't feel anger anymore. Just grief. Deep, bone-aching grief for a daughter who no longer existed. You believed him over me, I said. Over your own father. I didn't mean to hurt you. But you did. I'm sorry, Dad. She choked out, her voice cracking. I'm so sorry. Please don't cut me off. It was then I realized what this call really was. Not confession, not repentance. It was a plea for preservation. She didn't want forgiveness. She wanted access. Access to sympathy, to the idea that I might one day soften and let her back in. It wasn't enough for her to destroy my trust. She still wanted a bridge to walk back over when the storm passed. I tightened my grip on the phone. My voice was calm. I had already rehearsed it in my mind. You don't get to call me anymore, Elise. Silence. I've spoken to Victor. I continued. The deed will be reversed under fraud. The vineyard will be restored to the Clark estate. Your name will be removed from all business operations permanently. You'll have no access to funds, no stake, no inheritance. Dad, please, I'm disowning you, Elise. She gasped, almost as if I had struck her. You don't mean that. I do, I said. I meant it the moment you signed my name like it meant nothing. You stole from me, lied to me, sold off your mother's legacy like a damn auction item. Her breathing was erratic now, hiccuped with tears. I'll do anything. Just don't shut me out. Please don't leave me alone. I didn't leave you. You walked away. I heard her sob then, a deep, guttural kind of sob I hadn't heard since she was a teenager, when her high school boyfriend dumped her and she cried on our porch for hours. But that girl was gone, and I wasn't going to resurrect her. I'm hanging up now, I said. Daddy, please, don't call me that again. And then I ended the call. I stood in the quiet house for a long time after, the darkness wrapping around me like a second skin. I waited for the guilt to come, for the pang of regret or second-guessing. But it didn't. All I felt was relief. Not triumph, relief. Because boundaries are only lines until you make them walls. The next morning, I had the estate's locks changed. I called the vineyard manager and instructed him to start removing all branding associated with Terravine. The social media pages were reported and taken down. Elisa's login credentials were revoked from every system. That same week, I donated a portion of the estate's profits to the local farm workers union. I sent it anonymously, but they knew. And when the union leader left me a voicemail, just 3 words, "We remember everything," I felt something settle inside me. It wasn't vengeance. It wasn't even justice. It was peace. By the following week, the vineyard was mine again, on paper, at least. The forged deed was nullified by the county court after Victor submitted the forensic analysis and testimony from the notary Darren had bribed. I remember sitting there in that cold courthouse, listening to the judge read out the ruling while Elise sat silently beside her public defender, her face pale and blotchy. Darren wasn't there. His bail terms had been revised after a witness accused him of attempting to coerce their silence. Elise didn't look at me once. She just kept her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles white as bone. News spread fast, not just among friends and neighbors, but through the entire wine community. Some called to express support. Winemakers I'd known for decades, wholesalers, even 2 local journalists who told me they admired how I handled it with restraint. Others were more cautious. A few business partners withdrew temporarily, citing uncertainty. The gossip mill in Sonoma turned like wildfire. Every brunch, every wine bar, every farmer's market, it was all, "Did you hear what Elise did?" And "I can't believe Ray went that far." One woman at church even said I had humiliated her own daughter. Was I supposed to let her rob me and clap politely? I asked dryly. She didn't answer. But it wasn't just strangers. Family turned too. My younger brother, Greg, called me 2 days after the hearing. I hadn't heard his voice in nearly a year. "Ray," he said, his tone already loaded, "I know she messed up. But you had her arrested. Your own daughter. I sat down hard in the rocking chair on my porch, pinching the bridge of my nose. She forged my signature and transferred the estate into her husband's name. That's not a mess-up. That's a heist. She's blood, he snapped. You don't turn your back on blood. No, Greg, I said, my voice suddenly sharp. You don't bleed someone and then expect loyalty. She didn't make a mistake. She made a plan. He hung up on me after that. I haven't heard from him since. Funny how family only seems to show up once the drama's in full swing. No one called when I was sitting alone in that big empty house after Lisa died. No one came around when I was working 14-hour harvest days by myself. But the moment I set a boundary, boom, suddenly I was the villain. Suddenly, I was cruel. I started walking the vineyard every morning at sunrise, like I used to. There's a stillness at that hour that you can't buy. You earn it. The air smelled like dew and wet earth, not like branding or PR. The vines had begun to bloom again, early clusters peeking from beneath bright green leaves. It was quiet, and for the first time in months, I let myself breathe. The tasting room was stripped bare by week's end. We removed the Terravine branding, tossed the marketing boards, pulled the rugs Elise had imported from a high-end design catalog. I had the place cleaned, repainted, restored to its old warmth. I brought back the original Clark Estate signage, its oak frame cracked with age but still standing. We rehired Martha, the retired tasting manager who'd left when Darren tried to cut costs by outsourcing the role to a virtual sommelier app. When she stepped through the door and saw the space again, she said, "It feels like home." But not everything went back to normal. How could it? Guests came with cautious eyes. Some didn't mention the scandal at all. Others lingered too long at the register, clearly debating whether to ask about Elise. One man said, "You were harsh, but I respect it." Most people wouldn't have the guts. I nodded but didn't answer. What could I say? That I was proud? That every night I still heard her voice in that last call. "Please don't leave me alone," and still felt a flicker of guilt? No, I wasn't proud. I was just resolved. One evening, a younger vineyard worker, Luis, came by the porch. He was in his 20s, wiry, quiet. His sister had been one of the undocumented workers Elise used in college. He handed me a bottle of Clark Estate 2007, the same vintage Elise used to boast about. "I kept this," he said softly, "even after what she did. I always liked how your wife used to treat us during harvest. Like people." I swallowed hard, taking the bottle in my hands. "Thank you." He nodded once, then added, "You didn't just save your vineyard, Mr. Clark. You reminded all of us that some names still mean something." After he left, I sat out there for an hour holding that bottle. My wife had once said that 2007 would outlive all of us. She was almost right. Victor stopped by a few days later. He was pleased with the legal outcomes. Elise would face sentencing in a few months. Darren's charges had expanded after investigators uncovered a tax fraud scheme linked to his other ventures. Victor poured 2 glasses of wine and raised his glass. "To survival," he said. I raised mine too. "No, to boundaries." He smiled, but it was tight. "You think she'll ever reach out again?" I told her not to. "And if she does?" I took a long sip. The wine had aged beautifully, warm, structured, unflinching. "Then she'll hear the silence she gave me first." The vineyard didn't change overnight, but it began to breathe again. Slowly, deliberately, as if exhaling after holding its breath too long. By early June, the vines were flowering in clusters, the earth soft from spring rain, and I could finally walk the rows without feeling haunted. The silence no longer felt like absence, it felt like clarity. The kind you only find after choosing yourself, even when it costs you blood. Elisa's sentencing date came and went without fanfare. She accepted a plea deal, 18 months of house arrest, 5 years probation, and a formal financial restitution agreement. Darren, ever the coward, flipped on her the moment the wire fraud charges hit. I read the transcripts of his statement. He blamed her entirely. "She was the emotional engine," he said. "I just handled logistics." As if logistics meant laundering money and coercing people into silence. The judge didn't buy it. He got 3 years in federal prison. Elise got the ankle monitor and a headline that won't vanish from Google for decades. I didn't attend the hearing. I didn't need to. I had already heard everything I needed to in that final call. Her voice still echoed sometimes, especially late at night. Please don't shut me out. But I had. And I had done it with the full knowledge of what that kind of silence costs a man. She was still alive, still breathing. But to me, she no longer existed. That was the line I drew, and this time, I didn't waver. In the weeks that followed, something shifted in town. At first, I thought it was just the aftermath of gossip settling. But it went deeper than that. People approached me differently, more cautious, more respectful, even if they disagreed. One neighbor stopped me at the feed store, his arms crossed. "Don't know if I could have done what you did," he said. "My daughter crashed my truck once, and I still gave her the keys again." I nodded. "And did she ever stop crashing things?" He didn't answer. It wasn't about vengeance anymore. It never really was. What I wanted, what I needed, was to reclaim something Elise had stolen long before she forged my name. My dignity. My belief that what I built mattered. That my father's sweat, my mother's ledger books, my wife's recipes for harvest feasts, that all of it wasn't just scenery to be redesigned, flipped, and rebranded. It was history, and history matters. I started holding small community tastings again. Nothing big. No press. Just locals, farmers, pickers, friends. We used the old wooden bar, poured from dusty bottles, laughed too loud, and stayed too late. We played jazz records and let the dogs run through the vineyard after dark. And in those moments, I saw glimpses of something I hadn't felt in years. Joy. It came not from perfection, not from brand elevation or expansion metrics, but from belonging, from being rooted. And I knew then I didn't need Elise to carry the torch. She never wanted it. She wanted her own fire. Let her burn. I'd keep the flame alive another way. One afternoon, I received a letter. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. "Dad, I know you won't answer me, and I understand. But I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. Not just for the vineyard. For all of it. For the way I laughed at what you built. For thinking I was bigger than something sacred. I don't expect forgiveness. But I do hope you're okay. I miss Mom. I miss how she used to make me look at the vines and say, this is what patience tastes like. I never understood it until now. I won't bother you again." Elise, I read it 3 times. Then I folded it in half and placed it in the drawer where I kept my wife's recipe cards. It wasn't a redemptive gesture. Not exactly. I wasn't about to call her back. But something about those words, "this is what patience tastes like," made me pause. Maybe for the first time, she had started to learn the lesson I'd tried to teach her all along. Not with lectures or punishments, but with a kind of silence that demanded reflection. Still, I kept my boundary. That was the difference. I didn't chase her, didn't offer a second chance. I chose peace over reunion. Because sometimes loving someone means protecting yourself from them. And that, too, is a form of love. I spent the summer restoring the South Field, an area Elise had tried to convert into an event space. I replanted heirloom vines there, the kind my grandfather once grew. The first few weeks were backbreaking, but good work always is. One morning, while watering the new shoots, I felt something shift in my chest, not sadness, not triumph, but something heavier. Acceptance. I had lost my daughter, but I had saved myself. By August, the first bottling under the restored Clark Estate label was complete. I stood in the warehouse holding the finished product, clean label, classic typeface, the family crest in faded gold. And I knew this was the wine I'd been trying to make all along. Not for awards, not for legacy, but for truth. This land wasn't just soil. It was memory. It was boundary. It was home. And I was still standing on it. Have you ever had to walk away from family to protect your peace? Sometimes, setting a boundary means losing someone you love, but keeping yourself in the process. Let me know in the comments. Would you have made the same decision or forgiven your daughter? Your story might just help someone else find clarity too. See you soon in the next story.